Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Jason and you're returning to your favorite true crime show, Killer Bites. Regardless of how much you buy into conspiracy theories, it seems reasonable to think that even the FBI has their secrets, right? Well, for serial killer Israel Keyes, that's definitely the case. Keyes and his heinous crimes were kept under wraps by the FBI for years. A serial killer, bank robber, burglar, arsonist, kidnapper, rapist, and necrophile who murdered at least 3 victims across the United States, but possibly as many as 11. A killing spree for roughly 14 years didn't seem to land any media attention. What's the reason? Who is this killer and what were his motivations? And how could he have gotten away with his crimes for so long? To get an idea of exactly who Israel Keyes was, we've got to trace it back to the very beginning. Israel Keyes was born in Utah on January 7th, 1978, to mother Heidi Keyes and father John Jeffrey Keyes. He was the second of 10 children and the first son born to a large family whose parents were Mormon expats from California. If there's a guidebook for how to raise a psychopath, well, his parents seemed to memorize it page for page. Keyes and his siblings were homeschooled and taught Mormon beliefs until his father left the Mormon faith and decided to move to the most remote and secluded piece of land he could find. His parents moved to a small town in Washington where Israel and his older sister America were toddlers. Can't help but noticing their names are kind of interesting, huh? For the first 7 years in Washington, they lived in a tent. This wasn't because of poverty or dire necessity, but rather a choice. The father decided on building a one-room cabin by hand. All of the family's children were home births and never once saw a doctor of any kind. As the oldest boy, Israel had responsibilities to help sustain the family, like killing game to feed the family. In many ways, he assumed the role of the father because his actual father, when he wasn't building this cabin by hand, was working on the land or the mountain or out in the woods praying for hours on end. Totally isolated from society, the Keyes family lived in that one-room cabin where they lived without electricity or running water. The family attended services at an organization which called itself a church, but really gave sermons focused on white supremacist Christian identity ideology. During this time, the Keyes family became friendly with another family which had their own murdering son, Chevy Kehoe, who was later convicted of a 1996 triple murder. By age 10, Keyes began illegal and dangerous behavior. He engages in breaking and entering, stealing guns, setting fires, and by age 14, he's torturing and killing household pets. Due to his free admission and gleeful attitude about it, Keyes was ostracized and actively avoided by other young children around his age who attended the church. Later, while in custody, he told the FBI that by the age of 14, he realized he was very good at sitting out in the woods for hours on end without making a move, and he committed his first abduction and stranger rape at about age 16. His parents were so religiously zealous, they forbid their children from learning musical instruments as they were against God, and they were also forbidden to watch movies and had to secretly escape their parents' watch to see movies with friends. At some point during this period, Keyes renounced his former faith and declared his atheism to his parents, which resulted in their eviction of their son and total family shunning. Israel became obsessed with Satanism and planned to conduct a ritualistic murder. Now here's where things get even more unsettling. Keyes attempted to join the military at age 20 and was successful. No birth certificate, no social security number, no problem. Well, apparently if you're a born killer, the military might see something in you, and they certainly did with Keyes. The military made all kinds of exceptions for him. He was groomed into kind of a super soldier, and his peers were terrified of him. Did the government contribute to building this monster? I'd say yes. After a DUI arrest, Keyes was, can you believe this? Honorably discharged from the Army with an Army Achievement Medal for his meritorious service. Newly freed from his fatigues, he started in on his plans for killing. Completely random rapes and murders of men and women, young and old, in broad daylight and in darkness, with the aid of kill kits that he stashed in different states, sometimes years in advance of a crime. One thing he routinely did was to make a target for campgrounds and isolated locations, claiming his usage of guns was only out of necessity, as he preferred strangulation. This was because this serial killer found pleasure as he witnessed his victims lose consciousness in their struggle. He's believed to have committed his first murders as a teenager between 1996 and 1997. His victim, Julie Harris, was a 12-year-old Special Olympics medalist in skiing and disappeared in 1996. Her remains were found a year later in a wooded area a few miles away from her home. Cassie Emerson, another young girl, was reported missing after her mother's remains were discovered in their burned-out trailer home in June 1997, and Cassie's remains were found in 1998, about 13 miles from her home. There were no arrests in either case. Keyes did not admit to killing either girl, but did admit that his first act of arson was with a trailer. For a brief stretch of time, it seemed Keyes was able to resist the urge to kill, but not much else. While Keyes did not admit to any murders during his 3 years in the U.S. Army, he did admit to the attempted rape of 2 different women. Specialists on the case believed he resumed his killing spree in 2001 following his discharge. Keyes admitted to investigators that he killed 4 people in Washington state. Keyes was then considered a suspect in the 2007 crimes by the Boca Killer near Boca Raton, Florida. The first case was the murder of Brandi Gorenberg, who was abducted from a shopping mall parking lot. Within an hour, her body, with 2 fatal bullet wounds, was dumped at a different location. Another crime was the kidnapping of an unidentified woman who claimed she and her toddler son were abducted from a shopping mall parking lot on August 7, 2007. The kidnapper wore a mask and sunglasses, but the victim did get glimpses of his face and described him as a tall, athletically built man with long hair and generally matching Keyes' description. The woman was released unharmed after the assailant forced her to withdraw cash from an ATM machine. The third Boca case was the murder of Nancy Boquicchio, 47 years old, and her 7-year-old daughter Joey, who were found fatally shot in their vehicle in a mall parking lot on December 12, 2007. Keyes confessed to at least 1 murder in New York State in 2012, but authorities weren't able to determine the identity, age, or sex of the victim, or when and where the murder may have occurred, although they still considered the confession credible. Keyes confessed to committing bank robberies in New York and Texas, as well as admitting to authorities he burglarized a Texas home and set it on fire. Authorities claim Keyes may have murdered a woman believed to be Deborah Feldman in April 2009 in New Jersey and buried her near Tupper Lake, New York. He also admitted to murdering Bill and Lorraine Currier of Essex, Vermont. Horrifyingly, he broke into the Currier home on the night of June 8, 2011 and tied them up before driving them to an abandoned farmhouse, where he shot Bill and then sexually assaulted and strangled Lorraine. Their bodies have never been found. 2 years prior, Keyes hid a murder kit, which he later used, near the Currier home. After the murders, he moved most of the contents to a new hiding place in Parrishville, New York, presumably for another murder. That kit remained there until after his arrest. What finally ended his free rampage was his murder of Samantha Koenig. He tragically killed 18-year-old Koenig, who worked as a barista in Alaska. Keyes kidnapped Koenig from her job on February 1, 2012. He took her debit card, sexually assaulted her, and then killed her the following day. He left her body in a shed and went on a pre-booked 2-week cruise to the Gulf of Mexico. After his cruise, he came back to Alaska, removed Koenig's body from the shed, applied makeup to the corpse's face, and snapped a picture of her body, posed to appear as though she was still alive. After demanding $30,000 in ransom, Keyes dismembered Koenig's body and discarded it in Matanuska Lake, north of Anchorage. It took a while for the police to take notice, though, because there wasn't much urgency on the part of the police department. They didn't even rope off the crime scene. Later, the FBI said that Keyes had Samantha and he had walked her all over Anchorage for 4 or 5 hours, and they were seen 13 times together. Keyes just didn't care because he was so used to the way the police department worked. He knew there would be no sense of urgency, and he was right. How did he know about the tendencies of the police department? Well, he'd studied them for years. Keyes read Mindhunter inside the FBI's elite serial crime unit when he was a kid, and continued to meticulously study serial killers and the behaviors of law enforcement. Keyes admitted to idolizing Ted Bundy and felt that he had shared many similarities with him. The police were able to track withdrawals from Koenig's account as Keyes moved throughout the southwestern United States. During that time, the police controversially refused to release surveillance video of Koenig's abduction, arguably because it was so clear that it was an abduction and they simply hadn't acted fast enough. The surveillance video from inside the coffee kiosk clearly shows a large man leaping into that kiosk, and later, Koenig trying to break away from him with her hands bound in front of her. Keyes was arrested by the Texas Highway Patrol in March of 2012. When his vehicle was searched, officers spotted Koenig's ATM card and cell phone. While incarcerated, Keyes spoke to investigators several times and stated a wish to be executed within a year. But then, on a Wednesday in May of 2012, Keyes attempted to escape during a routine hearing. But somehow, despite being arguably one of the highest value prisoners the government had, he was able to conceal a razor blade in his cell and committed suicide. Keyes did leave a suicide note found under his body consisting of an ode to murder, a sickening poem of sorts, but offered no additional clues about other possible victims. There were drawings of 11 skulls, 1 pentagram, and Baphomet, which had been drawn in blood and found underneath Keyes' jail cell bed after his suicide. One of the drawings included the phrase, "We are one," written at the bottom. The FBI believes that the number of skulls correlates with what may be the total number of his victims. How he secured such a weapon is unclear. It's curious and shows similarities to Jeffrey Epstein, how he was somehow able to commit suicide while under intense observation and incarceration. Some things may remain a mystery, and in the case of Israel Keyes, his lunacy may never be understood. Not truly. His appalling crimes and the lives lost are a tragic mystery that may puzzle even the most curious true crime enthusiasts. That's what we've got this week, folks, so be sure to comment your thoughts and curiosities below, and tune in again soon for another episode of Killer Bites.